Well, hello, friends, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for Concert Conversations, an intimate conversation about what we're going to hear at the upcoming concerts of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, namely Masterworks number 5, which is going to be a phenomenal opportunity for us to hear a wonderful work that requires the marshalling of great forces. Gabriel Fauré's Requiem. But before that, we've got quite a little celebration of Bach. And to tell us about that, I'm very happy to introduce our guest of honor, the music director and conductor of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, Maestro Mark Russell Smith. Maestro, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And as we get started, of course, as ever, thanks to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors for making this series possible. But we've got some, not by any means a lightweight to tee things up for Monsieur Fauré, and that is Herr Johann Sebastian Bach. How did this program come together in your mind?
Well, I thought of the idea of well, I mean, first of all, what pairs well with Fauré that's not too long? You know, we have a chorus, we have soloists, and the idea of doing something called kind of like a collage. I'm calling it a Bach collage. And what that means is that, I mean, first of all, it's impossible in certainly one half of a program, and certainly in one short half of a program, to capture all of Bach, because there's the instrumental Bach, there's the solo strings Bach, there's the cantata Bach, there's the organist Bach, there's the keyboard Bach, there's the passions Bach. I mean, which Bach are we talking about? And so, I mean, first of all, he's so, wrote so much music, and every life situation for him changed his output, where his focus was and what the genre was, basically. And so to sum up Bach in half an hour is impossible. So we'll start with that premise. But we're going to try. And what we're going to do is really go from piece to piece to piece to piece without any interruption. And so we're going to have one view of Bach and Bach's music going right into another view, into another side, into another side, into another side. And so we start with the Brandenburg Concerto, with an opening movement of the Brandenburg Concerto. We go directly into a cello suite, one movement of a cello suite. Following that, I think we play Air from the Orchestral Suite. I think following that, we have music from the St. Matthew Passion, which follows a keyboard piece. You can't have Bach, you can't have a Bach tribute without a keyboard piece. But what keyboard? We don't have an organ in the Adler. We don't, anyway. So we're going to have Marian Lee play from the Well-Tempered Clavier on the piano, which Bach didn't even have. But but that is something that Bach is today. Pianists play Bach, and who knows if Bach were alive during the piano, what instrument he would have preferred. But that's not the point. The point is the music, whatever, we're playing on modern instruments now with steel strings instead of gut strings. I mean, there are all sorts of things that aren't exactly the same as Bach, but the music is. And then we end with, from the B minor Mass, Dona Nobis Pacem.
A mechanical question: the works that you're doing from the St. Matthew Passion and from the B minor Mass, will that include vocals, or will that be all instrumental?
Yes.
It will. That's fantastic.
Yes.
So
because we have, so yet another thing, in the Fauré Requiem, we have a soprano and a baritone solo.
Exactly.
And so if you have those people around, it makes perfect sense to use them in the first half. And so we have two solos from the St. Matthew Passion, kind of the spiritual core. Both these are the two big solos from St. Matthew, but the spiritual core of the piece, to be honest. And so to do any kind of Bach tribute or whatever you want to call it without including religious music, a cantata or something, I mean, and still we're leaving stuff out. I mean, there's still a lot of Bach that we're not even touching,
Well, okay, so I want to get back to the Well-Tempered Clavier, but in picking things from the St. Matthew Passion, I mean, it is so monumental. I would just say you can't go wrong with any pieces that you pick, even though I'm sure you were agonizing over the pieces that didn't make the cut. But were there certain traits of the, let's see, it looks like 4, you're doing a recitative, a chorale, 2 arias. Were there certain traits about any one of those 4 that particularly drew your attention?
Well, so again, like, this is the spiritual kind of center point. And we have a soprano, and we have a baritone. So that dictates a lot. Like in the St. Matthew Passion, he wrote, for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass solely and of course the evangelist and all that. But these arias in particular, especially Aus Liebe, which is when, right toward the end, and where the bottom of Christ's life and where the bottom of mankind basically drops out. And so this whole aria, there's no bass line. It is all suspended above. It's a flute solo, 2 English horns, and soprano. And so the inflection point comes from the English horns kind of driving us forward. And then For Love is My Savior Dying. And it's one of the most poignant pieces of music ever. And Sarah Shafer, our soprano, is one of the most poignant artists that I know. And it's going to be magical. And it's I would argue more magical in context of the Passion itself, as we've taken the journey, but undeniably just heart-wrenching and just fantastic as the bottom drops out. Baroque music is built from the bottom up. We have the figure bass, literally, and we have, just like jazz, you have the bass and piano keeping everything together, and then everything's on top of that. Same for Baroque music, but in this case, there is no bottom because the bottom of humanity has dropped out at this point. We have the moment where Jesus dies, and we have the chorale that many people know as "O Sacred Head, Now Wounded," which comes back in many different guises in the St. Matthew Passion. In this case, the most quiet, the most reflective chorale. And then we have Mache dich, which is where the human says, I will bury you. I will take it upon me. It's on me now. I recognize what you did, Christ, and I will take it upon me. And so it's this beautiful Siciliano with, again, 2 English horns and strings. And oh my God, I have goosebumps just thinking about it right now. You can't see, but it is yet another just gorgeous, spiritually inflected moment that is like nothing else. And so, to pick and choose from the St. Matthew Passion is impossible. But we have soloists, we have the chorus, and these 3 that have been chosen, not counting the rest, it's before the arias, are really the spiritual center point of it. So
if you don't mind, because I always learn from you, unpack for me a little bit what Siciliano entails in this.
Well, it's a 12/8. It's like being
okay.
2, 3, 4. It's a dance. Okay. It's a dance, and of course, Baroque music is all about dances. And Bach had his eyes and ears open. He didn't travel, but he would get music from Vivaldi and get music and look at other people's music. And so the whole Siciliano dance is a 12/8, where there's this nice little bum, 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 which the whole thing is predicated around. So
now, before we get to Fauré, I wanted to just dwell a little bit. You mentioned something that Bach was not writing for a modern instrument like the pianoforte, right? And so as he was writing, and this is just always blows me away, you couldn't really moderate, what was happening on your strikes. And yet, when you listen to a gifted pianist take on the Well-Tempered Clavier, and hearing it with a harpsichord is wonderful, and it's amazing. But then how you can even add more expressiveness and emotion and feeling when you're making things a little softer, a little, more direct. And so I'm grateful that we get a chance to hear, as you said, Marian Lee perform this on the piano.
Right. Well, the Well-Tempered Clavier was both a kind of an experiment and kind of a way of showing that tempered tuning and how that worked as opposed to non-tempered tuning. Anyway, basically everything's possible in every single key, which was kind of news to the Baroque people, and Bach was really showing the way. So that's and to have etudes, to have something that students can learn from while still being like just unbelievably complex and thought out and expressive devices. You analyze, I got to know these pieces through analysis class at Juilliard, and you're just awestruck. Your jaw drops with the way he puts things together, the way with stratos, with pushing imitation, things turned upside down, backwards. I mean, all sorts of just like unbelievable manipulation, but while still, having a large musical expression, involved. And so to not have a keyboard work, I mean, we just couldn't not have a keyboard work. And again, there's no, you should have a big organ piece, but that wasn't an option, unfortunately, So anyway, and then closing with Dona Nobis Pacem is, I mean, hopefully not just wishful thinking, but it's definitely a statement. And certainly Bach, Bach had, was such a strongly religious guy and just contributed so much for and hoped for peace and it's anyway. I think a very appropriate way to close our Bach collage.
Well, it's wonderful, and it's I just am grateful for these interesting ways you put together program halves. But this is just really the first half. I know we're still
right.
Well, no,
first third probably.
Yeah, there we go. And then we're going to get into this monumental work. And once again, you're capitalizing on some great professional connections you've made, because it's going to be a lot more than our beloved QCSO on that stage as we turn to the Requiem of Gabriel Fauré. And so let's talk first about how you're going to bolster that stage.
Well, I mean, Fauré Requiem, is it monumental? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word. I mean, it's a requiem, and so there's a structure, there's a written structure, there's a formal structure that comes from the service, from the Requiem service. And so we know the words, we know the lyrics, we know what's provided. But what's so cool about conducting Requiem is that every composer brings their own take on it. Verdi is different than Fauré, is different than Missa Solemnis with Beethoven, is different than a Haydn Mass, is different, than whatever. I mean, every composer naturally brings their perspective to things. And so Gabriel Fauré is the quintessential French guy. And so the feeling and the atmosphere, I mean, his Day of you compare the Dies Irae of Gabriel Fauré and Giuseppe Verdi, and it's like it's a bit night and day. I mean, not to say that the French Day of Judgment isn't going to be any less frightening, but just the depiction of it, just Fauré's language, it is just so very different. And so it's so French. It's so French, with beautiful lines, with incredible colors. I mean, he's very specific about color. The violin is hardly used at all. It's really about violas, cellos, and basses. And so there's that rich singing, dark, lower sounds of the strings. The violas take the lead. The violas kind of take the place of the violins. Violins only appear kind of as an obligato thing. The chorus, they have a huge range of things that they sing and style that they sing. But chordally and sound-wise, I mean, it couldn't be more French. Sure. And I love it. And it's also a piece that many, many people, especially amateur singers, like you've sung it. It's not, I shouldn't say it's not hard to sing, because it is hard to sing well, but lots of church choirs do it because the notes themselves aren't that hard. And so a lot of amateur singers have sung this. You hear it during Lenten season at church. I mean, it's of the classical I would say, classical music's Requiem. I mean, Fauré's is probably the most commonly used in everyday, church choirs, I think.
Well, and you have to understand, Maestro, I was trained since childhood that when members of the Augustana choir appear on a stage, it's monumental. It's just a response. But I did want to make sure we noted that Dr. John Hurdy and the Augustana Oratorio Society and choral artists will be performing. They'll be filling that role for you, as well as, right, as you mentioned, our soprano, Sarah Shafer, and our baritone, Nathaniel Sullivan. And great to have them once again in our midst.
Quad City native, Nathaniel Sullivan.
Absolutely. Yep. But so I found it interesting that, so you kind of touched on this. Many composers have done Requiem, and they are invariably psychological because the subject matter is death. Now, Fauré said, I think I want to make sure I get the quote somewhat close to being right, that it wasn't written for anything in particular, for pleasure, if I may call it that, but I don't buy that. If you're going to spend this much time contemplating mortality, I mean, that's just inescapably an expression of the psyche. And I just, even as with what you've said about the nature of this music, there is something that is a reminder that time is well itself.
Well, and
And
Fauré's not afraid of it. I mean, Fauré
right,
is not. I don't think Fauré is terrified. I he's comfortable with it, I think, or with the concept of it. I mean, the music, of course, is very dramatic in a very French way, in a very different way, as I said, than Beethoven or certainly than Verdi, and even Brahms. You know, the Brahms Requiem. But yeah, I mean, but what else would we expect? I mean,
right.
composers speak their language, and we don't want. Verdi wrote an opera, basically, the Verdi Requiem, and Fauré didn't write an opera. He wrote something very soothing. He wrote something very comfortable. That's not really the right word. Something that isn't terrifying. That's very human. That's very comforting, I guess, is the right word.
I think the reason there was that theory is that he worked on it mostly in the 1880s, and in that decade, it saw both the death of his father and his mother within 2 years.
Right.
And if nothing else, it doesn't necessitate being maudlin, but it does get you thinking about your own mortality,
Right.
as those anchors of your childhood, fade away, and you have to deal with that. So I'm not a psychologist. I don't play one on this sort of Zoom TV, but I still think it's got to be in the background somewhere.
Well, without doubt. I mean, exactly.
You
And
spend time with it.
right. I mean, Verdi said he's not a Christian, and Fauré kind of poo-poos it all. But I mean, let the music speak. I mean, the music speaks, and these people speak through their music. And so we can, I mean, hopefully we're not superimposing anything that's not true, but there's something unmistakable about the way Fauré portrays these things, and the way you feel afterwards, the way you feel during, and the way you feel afterwards.
And I'd say that's true, but I mean, I'm talking about this from a composer's point of view. I guess I should be talking about it from an audience member's point of view.
Right.
Because you don't have to adopt what any composer, what their mindset is. You don't have to, you can. But it's something you have to bring with you. We all have to bring with us is our mortality.
Right.
So in listening to this and putting together these kinds of works, remind us again of some of these challenges, because I really want folks to understand what a gift it is that our symphony can do these sorts of works that involve a chorus and soloists and all these other things. That doesn't just happen, and not every orchestra can do it.
No, it's true. And I mean, we have a great tradition. I mean, Augustana, of course, has had a great tradition of singing since they were founded.
The beginning.
Right, exactly. And certainly the idea of community singing, of choirs, it has been around, since immigrants came to the Quad Cities. And so the idea of communal singing is unique. And it's more common in some places than the others. I'm the upper Midwest. I live in Minnesota, as you know, and singing is such a thing, and communal singing is such a thing. And therefore, I mean, I think it's something that we have to do. It's something that we love to do. It's something that, I mean, logistically it's tricky because of the schedule of the college, because of, we can't have it every year because it's expensive, soloists, vocal solo, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there are all sorts of logistical reasons, but to have a full stage and, to have all of this humanity combining together to create something, I mean, there is something different about the human voice. And for an audience member, I mean, there's just something deeply rooted. I mean, the first thing you hear, the first sense in utero is sound. It's not sight, it's not touch, it's sound. And so there's just something deeply rooted in us, in our being, that the sound and the sound of a human voice, the sound of people singing, the sound of human voice to the ears is just so primal and so evocative, therefore. And so, and composers knew this. I mean, composers, Mahler, Beethoven, like Beethoven 9, he's like desperately trying to express, and then he turns to the human voice and boom, and even says, well, you've heard all this stuff and now it's time for a song. And composers know that. They know how much the human voice stirs audiences and stirs the soul. I mean, opera composers know that all the time. But composers like Fauré, I mean, they wrote for orchestras, they wrote for piano, they wrote all sorts of things. But it is a unique form of expression to have a big chorus. The communal singing together is a uniquely spiritual thing. And I don't mean spiritual in strictly Christian sense. I mean in a to get humanness sense.
Well, I'm grateful for all those descriptions you gave of prenatal music, but you left me the one that was low and outside. Our Mother's Heart is our first metronome. So we got that going for us too. Listen, I wish we could talk about this even further, but we've run out of time again. So I'm going to invite audiences to be there March 2nd and 3rd, whether at the Adler or at Centennial Hall. Join us a little bit early for Concert Conversations presented by Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors. But for now, please let me say once again, Maestro Mark Russell Smith, thank you so very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.